The light in the grand ossuary was dying, filtered through layers of translucent obsidian and weeping glass that formed the dome of the High Synod. It was a light that had shone for 10,000 rotations of the galactic arm, a symbol of the immutable stability of the Ethelgardian hegemony. Yet tonight it felt thin, brittle, as if the photons themselves were exhausted by the weight of the decision hanging in the air. High Chancellor Vogt sat upon his dais, his carapace polished to a dull, mournful sheen, his primary optical sensors fixed on the holographic projection hovering in the center of the vast, circular chamber. The air smelled of ozone and ancient parchment, a dry, sterile scent that the Ethelgard preferred, for it smelled of preservation. Around him, the tiered rows of the Synod were filled with the whispers of 100 different species, a low, thrumming vibration of anxiety that transcended language. They were watching a world die. The projection displayed the Scythian system, an unremarkable collection of orbital bodies on the fringe of the civilized sector, now drowning in the violent, purple hues of a gravimetric shear. It was a natural disaster of impossible scale, a tear in the fabric of real space that was slowly, methodically devouring the star and its 3 orbiting habitable worlds. The silence that followed the final report from the Science Directorate was heavy, a physical weight pressing against the chest plates and breathing apparatuses of the assembled delegates. Vogt shifted, the sound of his chiton scraping against the ceremonial stone echoing too loudly in the hush. He looked at the data scrolling alongside the dying star. The Scythians had sent the signal 3 cycles ago, a general distress call, a plea, a scream into the void. It was a Class 1 SOS, the kind that by ancient treaty demanded the immediate mobilization of the hegemony's relief fleets. But the fleets remained docked at the anchorage of Prime. The logic of the Synod was cold, mathematical, and absolute. The shear was unstable. To send ships into the gravity well was to risk the integrity of the rescue vessels. The success probability was calculated at less than 4%. The cost-benefit analysis had been run 1,000 times by the heuristic engines beneath the city, and 1,000 times the answer had been the same: containment, quarantine. Let the fire burn itself out. Vogt cleared his throat, a wet, clicking sound that drew the attention of the chamber. "The decision stands," Vogt said, his voice amplified by the acoustic architecture of the ossuary, rolling over the assembly like a wave of cold water. "The risk to the stability is too great. The Scythian system is designated as a lost cause. We will mourn them. We will erect a monument in the Hall of Remembrance. But we will not spend the lives of the many to save the lives of the few when the probability of success is a statistical error." There was a ripple of movement in the lower tiers, the avian delegates of the Krell ruffling their feathers in distress, the lithoid ambassadors of the Aurum shifting their bulk uneasily. They knew the moral failure of this moment. They felt the stain of it on their souls. But they were politicians, creatures of compromise and safety, and they knew that Vogt was right. The shear was a maw that would swallow fleets whole. It was then that the censor officer, a young Ethelgardian with a shell that still held the pale softness of recent molting, stepped forward from the monitoring pit, his movements jerky with terror. He did not speak immediately, he simply gestured to the hololith. The projection of the Scythian system flickered. A new icon appeared at the edge of the system's heliopause. It was not a hegemony signature. It was not a pirate transponder. It was a signal that burned with a raw, aggressive intensity, a jagged frequency that tore through the refined communication protocols of the Synod. Vogt leaned forward, his mandibles twitching. He knew that signal style. Every elder in the room knew it, though they had not seen it in active use for generations. It was crude. It was overpowered. It was unshielded. "High Chancellor," the young officer whispered, his voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. "We have a breach of the quarantine. A vessel has entered the Scythian gravity well. They are responding to the SOS." Vogt felt a chill that had nothing to do with the climate control. He tapped his claw against the armrest. "Identify, is it a rogue trader, a scavenger trying to pick the bones before the system collapses?" The officer shook his head, the motion frantic. "No, Chancellor." "The mass reading is? It is impossible. It registers as a planetary body, not a ship, and the transponder code, the code matches the exclusion zone." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The exclusion zone, the sector of space cordoned off by the hegemony 3 centuries ago, the home of the Deathworlders, the humans. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of panicked clicking, chirping, and shouting. Vogt slammed his staff of office against the floor, the thunderclap demanding silence, though his own hearts were hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Humans were a myth to the younger races, a nightmare to the older ones. They were biological absurdities, evolved on a world with crushing gravity, erratic tectonic activity, and a predator-prey ecosystem so violent it baffled exobiologists. They were known for two things: their terrifying durability and their absolute, unwavering refusal to accept the concept of the impossible. When the hegemony had first encountered them, the humans had been engaged in a civil war that cracked moons. The hegemony had walled them off, terrified that their madness would infect the galaxy. "Display the vessel," Vogt commanded, his voice steel though he felt like glass. The hololith shifted, zooming in on the edge of the Scythian system where the purple bruising of the void shear was darkest. The image resolved, and the silence that fell over the ossuary was the silence of prey recognizing a predator. It was not a ship in the elegant, curved style of the Ethelgard, nor the geometric perfection of the Krell. It was a slab. A monolith of scarred, dark metal, rectangular and brutal, bristling with antennae and emission ports that leaked radiation into the vacuum. It had no aesthetic grace. It was a tool, a hammer forged in the fires of a hellworld. It was immense, eclipsing the Scythian moons, its engines burning with a dirty, red nuclear fire that defied all safety regulations of the civilized galaxy. Along the side of the hull, painted in white letters kilometers high, was a script the translation software struggled to interpret before finally rendering the designation: UNSC Sisyphus, a dangerous ship. Not a warship, Vogt realized with a creeping horror, but something worse. A warship was designed to kill. This ship was designed to struggle. It was an industrial titan, a vessel built to wrestle with physics itself. "They are mad," the Aurum ambassador rumbled, his stone-like skin grinding. "The sheer tides will tear that hull apart. The radiation alone." "Open a channel," Vogt interrupted, his eyes fixed on the monstrosity on the screen. "Warn them. Tell them they are violating hegemony quarantine. Tell them to turn back before they are destroyed." The communications officer worked his console, his fingers flying across the haptic interface. "Channel open, High Chancellor, audio only. The video bandwidth is being consumed by their drive plume. It is overwhelming our sensors." A burst of static, white noise that sounded like a storm breaking filled the ossuary. Then a voice. It was deep, distorted by the immense gravitational interference, but calm, terrifyingly calm. It lacked the panic of the Scythians or the frantic polish of the Synod. It sounded like gravel tumbling down a mountainside. "This is control of the Sisyphus. We read your beacon, hegemony. We are ignoring your quarantine. We have a confirm on 3 billion life signs in the target zone. We are commencing intervention. Clear the frequency. You are cluttering our telemetry." "Intervention?" Vogt shouted, losing his diplomatic composure. "There is no intervention possible. The star is collapsing. The gravity shear will crush you. Turn back, human. This is a direct order from the High Synod." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that stretched for seconds, filled only by the background roar of fusion reactors pushed beyond their limits. When the voice returned, it carried a tone of dry, weary amusement. "We aren't here for the star, Chancellor. We're here for the people. And we don't take orders from people who watch neighbors drown. Sisyphus out." The connection was severed with a sharp click, leaving the Synod in the dark, watching the hulking shape of the human vessel accelerate, not away from the danger, but directly into the throat of the anomaly. The narrative shifted then, moving away from the sterile, fear-filled halls of the ossuary to the bridge of the Sisyphus, a place of shadows, red emergency lighting, and the oppressive bone-crushing weight of 2.5 standard gravities. Commander Elias Thorne sat in the command chair, his body strapped in with 5-point harnesses, his spine compressed against the gel cushioning. He was a man carved from the same material as his ship, scarred, dense, and unyielding. The bridge crew around him were not the slender, elegant beings of the hegemony. They were stocky, muscular, their movements economical and precise. They wore exoskeletal bracing suits, not for combat, but to help them endure the forces their own ship generated. The air here smelled of recycled sweat, hot copper, and coffee, the universal scent of human crisis management. "Time to intercept?" Thorne asked, his voice low. He didn't shout. On a ship like the Sisyphus, shouting was a waste of oxygen. Lieutenant Sarah Vance, the navigational officer, didn't look up from her display, her hands buried in a holographic interface that was screaming red warnings. 20 minutes to the optimal anchor point, Commander. The shear is escalating. Gravity tides are hitting 800 GS at the perimeter." The hull is groaning, but the structural integrity field is holding at 92%. Thorne nodded. "Get us closer. I want us in the upper atmosphere of the primary world, Scythia Prime. We need to be the shield." "Commander," the tactical officer, a hulking man named Davin, spoke up. "We have incoming transmission from the surface. The Scythian government, They think we're an invasion force. They're asking if we're here to loot the archives. Thorn closed his eyes for a brief second, a flicker of pain crossing his face. This was always the way. The galaxy saw the ships of Earth, ugly, brutal, industrial, and assumed the worst. They couldn't conceive that a species would build a ship the size of a city just to catch a falling world. "Put me through to the surface," Thorn said. "Wideband, all frequencies." The screen at the front of the bridge flickered, resolving into the image of a Scythian command bunker. The alien on the screen was reptilian, with large, terrified eyes and scales that had turned gray with stress. It was the Scythian matriarch. She was clutching a data slate as if it were a holy relic. "Terran vessel," she stammered, the universal translator smoothing out the clicks of her speech. "We surrender, take what you wish, just, please let the transports launch. We have children on the shuttles." "Do not fire on them." Thorn leaned forward, straining against the G-forces that were steadily climbing as they pushed deeper into the gravity well. "Matriarch, listen to me closely. We are not here to loot. We are not here to conquer. My ship is positioning itself between your planet and the anomaly. We are going to deploy the mag tethers. We are going to lock your planet in place relative to our mass." The matriarch stared, her nictitating membranes flickering rapidly. That is physics negating. You cannot anchor a planet. You will be torn apart." Thorn's lips quirked into a grim smile. "We're stubborn, matriarch. Now transmit the launch codes for your evacuation fleet. Our combat information center will coordinate your ascent vectors. We will act as a breakwater. We will take the hit from the gravity waves so your ships can climb out of the well, but you have to move now." Back in the High Synod, the view was apocalyptic. The hololith showed the human ship, a dark speck against the blinding violet radiance of the shear, descending toward the doomed planet. The sensors of the Ethelgard screamed as the Sisyphus did the unthinkable. It did not fire weapons. Instead, massive ports along its ventral keel opened, and 4 distinct beams of coherent gravimetric energy slammed into the bedrock of Scythia Prime. These were not lasers, they were anchors. The ship shuddered visibly on the display, its engines flaring from red to a blinding white-hot blue. It was trying to hold a planet steady against the tug of a collapsing star. "Look at the energy output," the science minister whispered, his voice hushed with a terrified awe. "They are burning antimatter at a rate that would deplete a sector's reserve in an hour. They are essentially turning their ship into a secondary gravity well to counterbalance the shear." Vogt watched, unable to look away. He saw the tiny specks of the Scythian evacuation shuttles rising from the atmosphere. Without the human ship, the turbulence of the shear would have swatted them like flies. But in the wake of the Sisyphus, in the shadow of its gravimetric exertion, the space was calm. The humans were carving a road of stillness through a hurricane of space-time. "Why?" Vogt asked, the question escaping him before he could stop it. "Why do they do this? They gain nothing, they lose resources, they risk extinction. It is illogical." The Aurum ambassador turned his slow, heavy head toward the Chancellor. "Perhaps," the stone being rumbled, "their logic is not based on survival of the self, but survival of the concept. They are Deathworlders, Vogt. To them, death is not a probability to be avoided. It is an enemy to be fought. They are fighting the death of this system because it offends them." On the Sisyphus, the situation was critical. The bridge was shaking violently, the sound of metal screaming under stress drowning out the hum of the computers. Sparks showered from an overhead conduit, landing on Thorn's shoulder, but he didn't flinch. "Hull breach on decks 14 through 20, Vance shouted. "We're losing atmosphere in the port stabilizers. The shear is increasing torque." "Vent the port sections," Thorn barked. "Seal the bulkheads. Divert all auxiliary power to the structural integrity field. Hold the line, people. The last transport is just clearing the atmosphere." "Commander," Davin yelled, "the anomaly. It's shifting. It's not a natural shear. The sensor patterns, they're rhythmic. It's pulsing." Thorn looked at the tactical display. The purple void was not just collapsing, it was throbbing like a heartbeat. A cold dread settled in his gut. This wasn't a random disaster. "Analyze that pulse," Thorn ordered. "Is it a weapon?" "Unknown," Davin replied. "But the frequency matches the theoretical signatures of a subspatial bore. Someone is drilling into this reality from underneath." The revelation hit the crew like a physical blow. If this was artificial, then they weren't just fighting nature. They were fighting an aggressor. And if the Sisyphus was the only thing standing in the way. "New contact," Vance screamed. "Emerging from the center of the shear, it's huge." On the main screen, the purple light tore open. Something emerged. It was sleek, made of a material that drank light, shaped like a teardrop of absolute void. It was silent, weaponless in appearance, but its mere presence caused the Sisyphus's shields to flare. It was a harvester, a machine sent to consume the dying energies of the system. "The hegemony was wrong," Thorn muttered. It wasn't a natural disaster, it was a feeding ground. He hit the comms button. All hands, this is the commander. We have a hostile entity. We are no longer a rescue vessel. We are now a blockade. We hold this position until the Scythians are clear. If that thing wants the planet, it has to go through us. In the ossuary, the appearance of the black teardrop caused panic. The Ethel Guardian fleets were light years away. They had no context for this enemy. It was ancient, older than the Council, a legend of the great silence that the archives spoke of in hushed tones, the enemy from beyond. And the only thing standing against it was the crude, ugly human brick. They will retreat now, Vogt said, his voice hopeful. Surely now they will retreat. They have saved half the population. That is a statistical victory. They will run. But the Sisyphus did not run. As the black teardrop moved to intercept the fleeing Scythian transports, the human ship detached its gravity anchors. The massive vessel pivoted, its thrusters firing with a violence that visibly warped the light around it. It placed itself directly in the path of the dark entity. And then the humans did something that silenced the galaxy. They didn't fire lasers. They didn't fire missiles. The Sisyphus opened its forward hangar bays, and thousands of small, independent drones swarmed out. They weren't fighters. They were industrial welding drones, mining bots, repair skiffs. And they swarmed the enemy ship like white blood cells attacking a virus. They latched onto the sleek hull of the dark entity and began to dismantle it. They are mining it, the science minister gasped. They are treating the enemy dreadnought like an ore deposit. It was the ultimate insult, the ultimate statement of dominance. The humans looked at an ancient cosmic horror and saw raw materials. The Sisyphus drove forward, ramming its reinforced prow into the side of the enemy vessel, grappling it with magnetic clamps. The human transmission cut through the static again, broadcasting to the entire system, and by extension to the frozen council in the ossuary. This is the UNSC Sisyphus to the unidentified aggressor. You are interfering with a humanitarian operation. You have 5 seconds to power down your core and prepare to be boarded. If you refuse, we will scrap your vessel for parts. Compliance is mandatory. The audacity was paralyzing. The dark entity, a machine intelligence that had culled civilizations for eons, seemed to pause. It fired a beam of dark matter energy that struck the Sisyphus amidships. Armor plating boiled away. Atmosphere vented in great crystalline plumes. But the human ship didn't buckle. It was built with redundant spines with compartmentalized honeycombs. It was built to break and keep going. The Sisyphus returned fire, not with energy beams, but with massed drivers, giant railguns that accelerated tungsten slugs to a fraction of light speed. Kinetic energy. Brutal, simple, unstoppable. The slugs smashed into the delicate, advanced shielding of the dark entity, shattering it through sheer momentum. For an hour, the Synod watched the brawl. It was not a space battle. It was a bar fight in zero gravity. The humans used their ship as a bludgeon. They overloaded their reactors to create EMP bursts. They fought with a desperation and a creativity that the logical minds of the Ethelguard could not comprehend. And slowly, impossibly, the dark entity began to retreat. It could not calculate the variables of an enemy that was willing to destroy itself to win. It could not predict the actions of a crew that cheered as their hull breached. With a final, silent pulse of energy, the dark teardrop collapsed back into the shear, sealing the anomaly behind it as it fled. The Scythian system was quiet. The purple storm faded, leaving a bruised and broken star, but a stable one. The Scythian transports were safe in deep space, and floating in orbit of the ruined planet was the Sisyphus. It was a wreck. It was twisted, scorched venting gas, drifting listlessly. It looked like a corpse. "They are dead," Vogt said, a strange sorrow in his chest. "They sacrificed themselves." Then the comms crackled. It was Thorne's voice, weaker now, strained, backed by the sound of coughing and warning klaxons. "Hegemony control? This is Sisyphus. Anomaly neutralized. Evacuation complete. We require a tow. Our main drive is offline, and we're out of coffee. Over." The council chamber did not cheer. They were too stunned. They simply stared at the image of the burning, broken brick of a ship that had stared down a god and won. Vogt stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at the faces of the delegates, the arrogant, the fearful, the proud. All of them were humbled. The humans had not sent a diplomat to argue. They had not sent a fleet to posture. They had sent a workship, and they had done the work. Weeks later, the diplomatic fallout was still settling. The Sisyphus had been towed to a neutral station for repairs that the Scythian engineers insisted on performing themselves as an act of religious devotion. The hegemony had formally censured the Terran Union for violating the quarantine, but the censure was a piece of paper, and everyone knew it. The political landscape had shifted. The humans were no longer just the dangerous brutes behind the wall. They were the shield. Vogt requested a private audience with Commander Thorne. The meeting took place in a medical bay on the station. Thorne was lying in a regeneration tank, his left arm missing, replaced by a temporary cybernetic prosthetic, his skin a roadmap of fresh burns. He looked small without his armor, fragile. It was hard to reconcile this damaged creature with the voice that had ordered a cosmic horror to surrender. "Commander," Vogt said, standing by the tank. The translation matrix buzzed softly. "I came to ask why we have run the simulations, the resources you expended, the damage to your vessel, the risk to your crew. It exceeds the total economic value of the Scythian system. Why did you answer the SOS when we did not?" Thorne opened his eyes. They were gray, tired, but sharp. He looked at the High Chancellor of the hegemony, a being who ruled 100 stars, and he smiled. "You calculated the value of the system, Chancellor. You counted the rocks and the gas and the star. We didn't." "Then what did you count?" Vogt asked, genuinely baffled. "We counted the distress signal," Thorne said, shifting painfully in the fluid. "See, on Earth we have a history. We spent a long time killing each other, a long time ignoring pleas for help. We almost didn't make it. We learned the hard way that when someone screams in the dark, you don't check your wallet first. You light a flare." Vogt processed this. It was a philosophy that defied the core tenets of the hegemony's stability. It was dangerous. It was chaotic. "But the entity," Vogt pressed, "the dark ship, you could not have known you could defeat it. It was ancient." "We didn't know," Thorne admitted. "But that's the thing about humans, Chancellor. We're terrified of the dark. So when we see something trying to put out the lights, we get angry. That ship, that entity, it wasn't just a ship. It was a filter. It was the thing that cleans up civilizations when they get too loud. You guys, you hide from it. You stay quiet. You let neighbors die so the monster doesn't hear you." Thorne leaned forward, pressing his hand against the glass of the tank. "We don't hide. We make noise. And if the monster comes back, well, the Sisyphus is just a tugboat. Next time we'll send a warship." The threat hung in the air, not aggressive, but factual. Vogt realized then the true nature of the twist. The humans weren't just rescuers. They were the antibodies of the galaxy. The hegemony was the passive tissue, the fat existing to consume and grow. The humans were the immune system, violent, reactive, dangerous to the host if unchecked, but absolutely necessary when the infection arrived. As Vogt left the medical bay, he walked to the observation deck. He looked out at the stars, the billions of points of light. For thousands of years, he had looked at them and seen resources, territories, threats. Now he saw them differently. He saw them as campfires in a very dark forest, and he knew that somewhere out there in the black spaces between the stars, the ancient things were watching. They were watching the Ethelgard with contempt, but they were watching the humans with something else: caution. The narrative concluded not with a treaty, but with a feeling. The universe felt smaller, tighter. The SOS from Scythia was the final one that would go unanswered. The galaxy had changed. The safe, silent politics of the hegemony were dead, killed by a single dangerous ship that refused to turn away. The Ethelgardian High Synod returned to their ossuary, but the light was different now. It wasn't the light of preservation. It was the harsh, exposing light of dawn. And in the distance, past the quarantine zones, the forges of Earth were burning bright, building the next ship and the next, preparing for the war that only they had the courage to fight. The silence was over. The noise had begun. The philosophical weight of the event settled on Vogt's shoulders as he returned to his chambers. He pulled up the archived footage of the battle, the moment the Sisyphus had rammed the dark entity. He zoomed in on the hull of the human ship. Amidst the scorching and the twisted metal, there was a small, hand-painted symbol that he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't a military insignia. It wasn't a flag. It was a simple, crude drawing of a human hand, open, palm forward, a gesture of greeting. Or a gesture to stop? Perhaps both. The duality of the Deathworlders. They reached out with one hand to save and with the other to crush. Vogt deactivated the screen and sat in the darkness. He felt a strange sensation one he hadn't felt in centuries. He felt safe, not because of his fleets or his walls or his politics, but because he knew that out there in the cold, uncaring void, there was a monster that fought for the little guys. And for the first time in the history of the Ethelgard, the High Chancellor whispered a prayer, not to the ancestors, but to the dangerous ship. "Let them be on our side," he whispered to the empty room. "By the void, let them be on our side." And deep in the exclusion zone, under the orange smog of a heavy gravity world, the sparks flew in the shipyards, and the humans worked, unaware of the prayers, simply doing what they always did. surviving the impossible and dragging the rest of the galaxy along with them, kicking and screaming into the future.